Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I hope you had a fantastic day. So we're going to do our last question here on the American West topic, which is this importance question. So you've got to do two questions in the exam here. So I personally feel this is one of the easier questions on the paper. So because it's easy to understand, like we all know what importance means. So it could be something that's very significant, like your wedding day or having a baby. So, why is something important? So, for example, the question could be in the exam about why was the horse important to the Native Americans? And obviously, it enabled them to hunt, it enabled them to travel, their travois, all those kind of things. So, it's probably the easiest question to understand, and therefore probably where you get the highest marks. So, oh my word. So, there's a lot of information on this slide. So, I'm going to focus on this question about homesteaders. So, it could be a question like, why was technology important to homesteaders? So, you could use the examples here. So obviously Joseph Glidden invented barbed wire. This helped with the lack of timber because they could fence off their land, etc. They also you could talk about Joseph Halliday and his invention of the wind pump drill. We talked about enable them to get water to irrigate their crops and obviously for themselves. And John Deere invented the sod buster, which enabled them to kind of go through that really tough grassland on the prairie that was really difficult for them to plough through. So, new technology is really helpful, and obviously one of the main ones was the railroad. So it enabled it for the life of the homesteaders. It wasn't as lonely and tough. They could get supplies from the east, etc. So technology was incredibly important for the homesteaders. So the other section was the government was obviously really important for homesteaders because they passed two new laws after the Homestead Act. They passed the Timber Culture Act, which enabled them to claim more land, another 320 acres in total, and the percentage of that, I think, is about 40 acres had to be where they planted trees. That's what it's called, the Timber Culture Act. And then in drier areas, they passed another act called the Desert Land Act, which enabled them to claim more land because they weren't able to survive on the 160 acres. So the government played a role, but women were also important because they did kind of the jobs that men didn't want to do, like classic, so for example, collecting dung for fuel. They also provided, very isolated communities, provided care and took on this kind of caring role and provided, passed on remedies. They taught kids because obviously too far from schools. And, I think this is probably still the case today, really much better at forming social networks and making sure that the isolation wasn't so bad. So I know there's a huge amount of information there, but there's a big question around homesteaders. So what else could you be asked? So you could be asked lots of different questions. It'd be really impossible for me to do this in 5 minutes. So let me just give a few examples. So for example, why would something be important for the survival of the Indians? So say for example, it was the horse. If you try and remember that acronym, so the H for hunting, so it enabled them to hunt. The O for ownership, so they could sort of like not buy and sell, but they would like trade horses. They used horses to raid other tribes. On the R, it gave them status within the tribe. If you had more than 5 or 10 horses, you had a higher status. And I was struggling with the E, but I came with embarking. It enabled them to travel, from place to place as they obviously were nomadic. It could be about the buffalo, which should be really easy. I'm not going to talk any more about that. It could be about the teepee, obviously warm in the winter because they put the fire in with a hole on the top. It was cool in the summer when they could roll it up. It was light, portable, easy to transport, made from the buffalo hide, etc., etc. Or you could have the question about the tribe, which would be lovely. So, children didn't go to school. They learned to ride and hunt. Old people were left behind. They weren't cared for. They had very strict societies. Young men were in something called a warrior society and gave them pride about hunting. They had councils where they all agreed and sat in a circle and looked at each other. You could have why was a Homestead Act important? Because it gave the people land, it encouraged immigration, it led to manifest destiny, and also because it meant rich people become richer, we talked about before. You could also have a question around the law and order topic. So, why was Billy the Kid important? Because that's kind of a little story, big story thing. So he's an example about how there was conflicts over the resources between the Irish gang and his English employer. Is an example of the poor law enforcement, the isolation, the amount of poverty that was going on. You could talk about Wyatt Earp. Again, it's about resources and about the corrupt law enforcement, the kind of general lawlessness of the West. Or again, you could have a question about why was the reservation system important in kind of reducing or affecting the Native Americans. So the chiefs lost their power. They had to abide by, laws from Washington. Children were taken away from their parents and taught English. They were removed from the role of hunting and kind of affected their lifestyle, Christianity, and obviously they got de-skilled. So it's really hard to predict the question on this particular section, but we'll do some more before the exam. Thank you.